Today we're looking at Birmingham Pen Company's Frick Park Fern Hollow Creek. That's a long name, wow. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Birmingham Pen Company's Frick Park Fern Hollow Creek is a green ink. See, I remembered all that. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I put the ink into a different pen for a day. I then put it into a Pierre Cardin President with a medium nib to take my notes for this video. Before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. I almost forgot what pen I used. Up first is a chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately dunk it in the water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see this very light blue that pushes up into the green with a dark blue across the top. Very nice, very nice. It gives me real anticipation of what this should look like on the paper. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water, and that blue line is dark across the bottom. It's prominent. It's staying around. It makes me feel that this ink might have a little bit of resistance, although not the green and not that light blue that shows up across the top. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pens. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it generally seems to be doing pretty good. The second H gets blurry, which is the part I start to get a little bit worried about. I worry about losing any kind of important notes, but this seems to, on a majority, perform fine in a note-taking situation where you might need to highlight. Water reactivates and pulls up most of the ink. It leaves some of the greens and some of the blues behind. I don't know that water is going to do everything necessary, but when we look at Pen Flush, it did everything water did and a little bit more. Just a little bit more, but more, which makes me hopeful that water's all that's needed, that Flush is all that's needed to remove this from your pen. And I really do believe that's all it's going to take, but if it did take the 1/3 bleach solution, that will completely obliterate it. It's gone from the paper. Leaves a tiniest bit of the lightest yellow staining, which we've seen on the paper a number of times before, but I don't think you're going to need bleach for this. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Birmingham Pen Company's Frick Park Fern Hollow Creek has a viscosity of 1.56, which makes it a very wet ink. Holy wet. Right in the middle of that red. Now to find my average dry time, I use my writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. I average all of those. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Birmingham Pen Company's Frick Park Fern Hollow Creek, man that is a long name, has an average dry time of 19 seconds, which makes it normal. It's the slower side of normal, but still absolutely normal. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, in these god-awful sample forms, in these tremendously filthy, run away from these bottles sample form. I hate these bottles now, can you tell? That's what happens in the area where you open the bottle. It's not about spilling it, it's about the fact that it just sprays everywhere because of the inner plastic cap that I hate. Yep. I really don't want to... Oh no. Oh, I'm returning. That was scary. I just chucked it like a foot over to the side to throw it into where I put my samples that I can use at any point. And I missed. It hit the tile floor, and I was afraid that I had this green all over the place. To keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. I'm going to probably try and edit that moment out. Hopefully I remember by the time I get to edit this. Let's look at the Clairefontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 gives a barely readable green. It's just, No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Yes, it has a ton of shading, but it's shading from so light, it's hard to read. It's so light, it's hard to read. The extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. 12 seconds to dry. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. 17 seconds to dry. This is not an ugly green. It's a nice green. It's actually, it makes me think of a park. It's a very nice green in that. It's just when it gets lighter, it's just, 17 seconds to dry with the medium. Scrubby shows us no color variation. We didn't get any color variation. The smear test, I don't think you could recover it. So we go to Tomoe River, which gives no bleeding. It does give ghosting. The 1.1 shows no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It shows shading, but again, it's shading from so light, it's almost white, even on Tomoe River. Extra fine, a noticeably darker tone. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. Boring, predictable right there. 18 seconds to dry. That's a long time. For that tone of green, that's a long time. Medium, noticeably darker tone. No feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. Wait an eternity at 31 seconds to dry for it to dry on Tomoe River paper. The Scrubby shows us no color variation in the extra fine or the medium. We didn't get any. I don't expect to be able to recover it based on that smear test. It was almost completely gone. Rhodia paper. Rhodia gives us no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Yes, it has shading, but only because it's so light, it's hard to read with the 1.1. The extra fine, thankfully, is a much darker tone with no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. 14 seconds to dry. Noticeably darker tone again for the medium. No feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. 19 seconds to dry. The Scrubby for both show us that we're not going to get any color variation, and we didn't. It's a nice green. You get change in color based on the pen. But here's the thing. I put it in a Pierre Cardin, the President. I wrote broad. That's not a broad. That's a medium nib. This is a wet medium, not a broad. So I say the tone can change based on the pen, because look, that is an entirely different tone of green. Entirely different. It looks like a different color. It's the same sample. It's that writing that made me worry about if I broke that on the floor and having to live with that color, because I really don't like it in that. Medium, noticeably darker tone, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. We saw that the Scrubby gets us nothing. The smear test says we could probably not recover it. I don't think you recover it if you smeared on this. G. Lalo, it's a nice laid paper. It's a gray background. I haven't really found many inks that do well on this. It's a problem with the tone of the paper. The only color I think that's ultimately going to do well on this paper is going to be black. It has no bleeding. It has no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shading. It's hideous on here because it's too light. This is a green ink that's too light to look at. I think this would be painful to read if you write a letter to somebody you don't like with this ink on this paper. It's too light. Remember, 1.1, G. Lalo, gray paper. That way they have to struggle. Just send it to your enemies. Extra fine, noticeably darker tone, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and no shade. We lose the shade because of that gray paper. That's not an uncommon thing to experience with this.
9 seconds to dry. The medium, a noticeably darker tone. Still, I don't think a very nice color on this paper. I just don't think it looks good here. But it is a noticeably darker tone and much easier to read. No feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. 13 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both the extra fine and the medium show us we're not going to get any color variation, and we didn't. And the smear test says likely if you smear you don't get to recover what it was. So I tested on Apica paper, which often makes inks look very nice. We have no bleeding. You know, the scrubby's starting to come through, but I'm putting it down stupid thick. We have no ghosting. The 1.1, too light to use still. It comes through too. It's so disappointing. It's so ugly right there. Oh my God. It's like having a friend with a really ugly baby that you gotta look at all the time. You're like, oh, your baby's so cute. Sorry, sometimes a baby can be ugly. I know somebody's gonna yell at me about that comment. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen. It does offer some shading because it's so light that it can't help but get darker into some places. It's hideous. With the 1.1, it's a noticeably darker tone with the extra fine. At least you can read it with the extra fine. No feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. It only took 8 seconds to dry. Noticeably darker tone when we go to the medium. No feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. Much nicer with the medium than it was with the other nibs. 11 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both say we wouldn't recover it if we smeared, say we don't get any kind of color variation. We didn't. The smear test says you're likely not going to recover it if you smeared it, and I don't think you could. And that's all that I have for the writing sample.
Instead of finding inks that look like Birmingham Pen Company's Frick Park Fern, Hollow Creek, and I got that down. I'm going to comment on the length of that name every time. Instead of finding inks that look like Birmingham Pen Company's Frick Park Fern, Hollow Creek, man, it impresses me I can do such a long name without a problem. I'm going to comment on that every time. I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Now I've chosen Atramentis Red Brown because it truly is a very nice red brown. I think browns go nice with green, reds go nice with green, which make that more of a standout compared to this sort of muted but still very nice green. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Birmingham Pen Company's Frick Park Fern Hollow Creek? I think it's an interesting shade of green that performs well most of the time. Now, I would avoid using this in broad, wet pens because what I see in its tone is not as nice. It just gets darker and it loses some of its character. Otherwise, to me, this is a nice performing ink and it's a great green color. Again, most of the time. I think this one works best with drier pens. I think it brings out some of its shading possibilities with drier pens. Perhaps a drier oblique. Thanks for watching.